Hi everyone, this is Chris Green, the History Chap, and I just want to share with you a few of the events that happened in British history this week commencing the 18th of October. So let's start by jumping forward one day, 19th of October 1922. British Prime Minister David Lloyd George is ousted. Since 1916, during the First World War, Liberal David Lloyd George had led a wartime coalition government with the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party. And in the general election of 1918, at the end of the war, incidentally the first general election women could vote in, the coalition was returned with a massive majority. But 3/4 of its MPs actually came from the Conservative Party. Nevertheless, Lloyd George remained in charge, even though he represented the minor party in the coalition. So a lot of the Conservatives were not happy. And by 1922, the Conservative backbench resentment against Lloyd George and their own leader, who was propping him up, a man called Austen Chamberlain, came to a head. At 11 a.m. on the 19th of October 1922, the Conservative members of Parliament met at the Carlton Club in London. They overwhelmingly ignored Chamberlain's pleas and voted to withdraw their support from the government. And Chamberlain and his fellow Conservatives were left with no other option but were obliged to resign from the government. And that afternoon, Lloyd George, with no majority, drove to Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation to King George V. And he was the last Liberal Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Incidentally, Austen Chamberlain's half-brother, Neville Chamberlain, became the Conservative Prime Minister in the late 1930s, and he went on to sign the Munich Treaty and led Britain into World War II, before resigning in 1940 to be replaced by Winston Churchill. And on we go, 20th of October 1714, King George I is crowned. George I was the first British monarch from the House of Hanover. The name comes from the German principality in northern Germany, where George was already the elector or prince when he succeeded the throne of Great Britain. He succeeded Queen Anne as her nearest Protestant relative, and I did a talk all about that recently, about how the Germans ever ended up on the throne of Britain. Great story. His ascension and coronation did not meet with universal approval. Within a year, Jacobites had arisen in armed revolt in support of Queen Anne's half-brother, who happened to be Catholic, James Francis Stuart. And on the coronation day itself in 1714, many Stuart sympathising aristocrats and gentry refused to attend the coronation service at Westminster Abbey. There was serious rioting actually during the festivities in towns across the south and west of England, especially Taunton in Somerset, Bristol, Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire, as Stuart supporters, who were known as Tories, attacked the Whigs, who were celebrating the ascension of a new Protestant king, King George. Interestingly, another little fact here for you, King George I's coronation was the first coronation in English history to be held on a Wednesday. There you go. Keep that one for a pub quiz sometime. 21st of October 1805, Battle of Trafalgar. Probably one of Britain's most resounding naval victories, certainly one of the most famous and probably had the greatest impact. Admiral Horatio Nelson, with a fleet of 27 ships, defeats a combined French and Spanish fleet of 33 ships off Cape Trafalgar, just off the coast of Spain. In fact, out of those 33 ships, 22 of those French and Spanish ships were sunk or captured, and the British lost not a single ship from their fleet. And this victory at Trafalgar ended Napoleon's hopes of ever invading Britain and gave Britain domination of the high seas for the rest of the 19th century. In fact, her supremacy at sea was such she never faced another major naval engagement until the Battle of Jutland, just over 100 years later in the First World War against Germany. Now, during the battle, Nelson was mortally wounded when a sniper shot him on the deck of his flagship, HMS Victory. He died in the last hour of the battle. His body was preserved in a barrel of brandy, brought back to Britain, and he was given a full state funeral in London. Nelson's buried in St Paul's Cathedral in the crypt where he shares a crypt with the Duke of Wellington, victor of Waterloo. And that's open to the public. And indeed, HMS Victory is preserved at the historic dockyards down in Portsmouth, should you ever be in that part of the world. If you'd like to know more about this historic battle, the Battle of Trafalgar, then look out, I'm releasing a special talk this Thursday coming on to mark the 21st of October. But before we do that, last one for this week, the 23rd of October 1942, the Battle of El Alamein begins. It was a turning point in the British fortunes in the Second World War, when the 8th Army under General Montgomery defeated the Germans and their Italian allies in North Africa. Commanded by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. otherwise known as the Desert Fox. This was actually officially the second Battle of El Alamein, because the first one had been fought during the summer, when the retreating British had finally turned and halted the magnificent advance of Rommel's forces. And now this was the opportunity to take the war back to the Germans and go on the offensive. Montgomery's army consisted of 160,000 men. He had 1,000 tanks, twice the number of tanks that Rommel's army possessed. The battle started, say, on this day, the 23rd of October, but on the 4th of November, the British gained a breakthrough, the breakthrough that they'd been fighting for, and within a week, they'd captured most of the Axis infantry, although Rommel was able to withdraw his mechanised forces. Nevertheless, it was the first major success the British had had over Axis land forces in the war, and it was a significant boost to morale, both in the army and on the home front as well. Meanwhile, on the 8th of November, American forces had landed on the north coast of Africa, Operation Torch. So you had the British driving westwards through Libya, following El Alamein, and on the other side you had the Americans landing in Morocco and Algeria, turning around and forcing Rommel back towards Tunisia. By May of the following year, 1943, the Germans and Italians had been driven out of North Africa, and the Allies planned their invasion of Italy, which was to knock Italy out of the war. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed that, then please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and if you want to learn more about British history, then get my free introduction and timeline to British history at thehistorychap.com. In the meantime, take care, and I'll see you very soon.